Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Amin here. Today's video is about the study tips and the revision tips that I use to help me get 11 nines at GCSE and 4 A stars at A level. I wanted to make this video to make revision tips and study tips more accessible to all. Personally, when I was young, I wasn't the most academically gifted. For example, I started out at bottom math set, but with tips like these and some hard work, I was able to improve. And I hope you guys can use these tips to improve also. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to start off with some study tips and then go into revision techniques later. So the main study tip that I want to focus on here is how to build discipline. None of us want to study, we don't want to sit inside of our rooms for hours and then just doing work, but it has to be done if you want to get to where you want to be. So the main way which I built my discipline is through the stopwatch method. So essentially what the stopwatch method is basically, when you want to start revising, you put all of your devices outside of your room, your iPad, your phone, anything that can give you notifications, you put it outside of your room and you start stopwatch. And every time you leave your room or you go to the toilet, you go to eat something, you stop that stopwatch. So it can give you, a clear defined, quantity of how much work in terms of hours or in terms of time you have done during that day. And the benefits of that really is it allows you to track your productivity. Let's say you've been less productive on one day and you see by the afternoon you've not done as many hours as you wanted to, you know that you need to lock in the evening. And also it allows you to push yourself and motivate yourself. So if you've seen how much hours you've done at the end of one day, you can say to yourself, yeah, tomorrow I want to do half an hour more. Tomorrow I want to do an hour more. So it can push you. And especially, for example, if you have a long holiday, like the Easter holidays, if you're pushing yourself every day to be better, that's going to add up so much in the long run. And that's going to, put you apart. And one last thing to make me feel disciplined is, small rewards, but often. And this is really important. You can't just cut out hobbies completely, because in studying, then that's kind of analogous to running a marathon full speed at the start. You're going to burn out and you're not going to do well. But you need to reward yourself throughout the marathon so that you can keep on going. One way which I did that is through cooking. I remember in my GCSEs when I had, I think physics paper 2 was my second last and further maths paper 2 was my last exam. So there was a bit of a gap there, and I remember cooking, helped me to stay motivated because a lot of other people had, finished GCSEs on that physics paper 2 day. So definitely use these tips to stay disciplined in your studying. Okay, so the next study tip that I have is to plan your revision. I can't stress this enough. If you want to get far and you want to progress with your revision, you need to have a clear timetable of when you're going to do what topic, which day. It's really important because you need to stay consistent, and you can only stay consistent when you have a clear timetable. I'll put an example of the timetable I had for the A-level Easter holidays around here, and I'll just stand to the side so I'll leave that. So what I did is basically, go through each of my subjects and see how many days I needed for each subject and which topics I was going to do on which days. And that's really important because, everybody has their weakness. For me, biology was my hardest A-level, so I would spend more time on those harder topics. And I also planned my revision more strategically. For example, if I knew that I was going out on a certain day, for example, Fridays, I used to, go out mostly, I would pencil in, less, topics that I was more comfortable with. So for example, pure mathematics, I was more comfortable with that compared to other topics. So I'd normally do that on a Friday. So making sure you've put in enough time for those harder topics is so important, because there's no point really, revising the easy topics and leaving the hard topics, because you're only fooling yourself. All right, so let's move on to some revision tips. So in my opinion, there's 3 steps to basically revision. There's understanding, memorizing, and application. So understanding is obviously, do you know the content? Not memorization, you don't know off by heart, but do you understand what's going on? And if you don't, that's fine, but you have to understand the content to get through to these other 2 steps. So check if there's after school clinics, maybe you can ask a teacher to, explain this topic to you at a lunchtime or a break, or also YouTube videos help a lot. Then memorization. And I use flashcards for this because I think that, they're really, really good for memorizing, key definitions, key processes, especially if you're in STEM subjects like, sciences like biology, chemistry, you should be using flashcards because honestly, they are so good. And application, that goes without saying. You can't do well if you don't do past paper questions. They are really, really important. But, the question is, how do you optimally use and create flashcards? Well, I say that, you need to create flashcards on the day that you learn the new topic. So, what I would do for A levels, for example, in biology, if we learned about immune system, I would come back home and create flashcards and, the humoral response, the cell-mediated response, those different things, because those are processes that you need to learn, mark scheme-wise, and you can just rattle them off and get all the marks. But what's really important is that you don't leave these topics untouched, especially in A-level. If you leave topics untouched for a good 2 weeks, it's so hard to come back to them and actually try create flashcards on them because it's gone out of your head. So honestly, do it on the night, do it maybe the night after, but keep it close to when you've actually been introduced to the topics. And yeah, what the benefit of this is that if you're creating flashcards well in advance of a test, because obviously if you just learned something, you're not going to be tested on it a week later. But if you're learning something, well in advance of a test, you're going to be very well equipped when it comes to holidays and breaks and half terms. So for example, let's say I had a test on immune system and it was after the Christmas break. In the Christmas break, I sit down to revise the immune system, and obviously I've already done my flashcards on the immune system, so I don't have to waste time creating flashcards, and I probably would have gone through them already at least once. So I'm already a step ahead, and it won't be your first time reviewing it, which is really important because it helps to build it into your long-term memory. And my last tip here for flashcards is that create your flashcards during your free periods. In A-level, you have free periods, and this is really important because, in free periods, I can say for myself, I wasn't that locked in. If you're around your friends, you're probably going to chat, get distracted. And so past paper questions and things like that, and even memorizing flashcards is going to be hard when you're not focused. But creating flashcards is a really good thing to do to use that time up wisely. Okay, so we've done memorization with flashcards. So let's move on to application with past paper questions. So my tips with past paper questions would to be only do these once you've passed these 2 steps here, understanding and memorization. There's no point whatsoever, doing past paper questions with your textbook out in front of you, because in the real thing, that's not going to be the case. So, always acclimatize yourself to what it will be like in the real exam. And be harsh when you're marking and forget your ego. Honestly, I can't stress that enough. There's nothing bad with getting questions wrong when you're practicing past paper questions. There's nothing bad. I used to get so many questions wrong, and in all honesty, I wouldn't get annoyed because I know that for each question that I got wrong, I wasn't going to get that same question wrong when it comes up in the test. Because a lot of the time, questions will, it might not be an exact repeat, but there's something that was mentioned in a question a couple of years ago that will come up again. So honestly, forget your ego. Don't be annoyed, if you don't do well in past paper questions when you're practicing, because all of that reviewing and all those mistakes that you got wrong in practice, you should be able to get those marks in the real thing. And that's what I'm talking about here. When you make flashcards of the ones that you get wrong and you constantly review them. This is the most important thing. Doing past paper, when teachers say to you, oh no, do your past paper questions, it's all well and good doing past paper questions. You get them wrong, fine. But you need to do this. This is the main way you're going to improve, by looking at what you got wrong, writing them on flashcards, as if just write out the mark scheme and review that and memorize the mark scheme. So when it comes to the real exam, you just like a robot, you write it down, you get all of the marks. Honestly, this is the meta. I mean, if you're not doing this, you have to do this. You have to constantly review the mistakes that you get wrong in past paper questions. Okay, so my last tip is to definitely use the specification to your advantage. Specification is not only for teachers to, keep track of what they're teaching you, but it's also for you to use as like a revision list. If you know everything in the specification, you will do well. There's no two ways about that. But also the specification can give you like really good definitions, mark scheme specific definitions that you can just rattle off in the exam. So I'll show you an example here. This is the AQA A-level biology one. If you go to unit 4, here. A gene is a base sequence of DNA that codes for the amino acid sequence of a polypeptide and functional RNA. So if you're asked in an exam, define a gene and give its function, if you just say that, that's boom, 2 marks there. See, it's easy, you just need to look at the specification and go through it line by line. And if you do that, you will do well. So guys, that's the end of the video. Please let me know what you thought in the comments. Please give me any video suggestions. And yeah, I hope you found it useful.